So welcome everybody. My name is Joanne Snapp. I'm the Director of Health Professions Advising, and I'm joined here today with my colleague Doug, who will be helping man the chat and helping in all the ways. And then we also have today a guest speaker who's going to take just about 5 minutes in the right now, and he's going to talk to you all a little bit about the Health Professions Scholarship Program that's offered through the U.S. Army, which is something that I'm personally a really big fan of, and I wish that more of our students would take advantage of that resource. So it's only going to take just a few minutes, and then we're going to jump into the exciting topic of Amcas and ACOMAs. Woo! All right, Sergeant Rivas, you want to take it away?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, good morning. Again, my name is Staff Sergeant Ronnie Rivas, and let's see if I can get my actual slides to be shared again. All right, excuse me, I'm just gonna open up this, oops. Well, I thought I was ready, but let me just see if we can share my slides here. All right, is everybody able to see that? You guys there?
Yep, they're able to see it.
Oh, okay, great. So yes, my name is Staff Sergeant Ronnie Rivas, and I am with the U.S. Army Medical Recruiting Station out of Sacramento, California. We encompass all of Northern California, like 88,000 square miles, to include also Reno, Nevada. I'm a medic in the Army. I was a flight medic for a while, and I got additional training for optometry and ophthalmology. So I do definitely have a little bit of experience in the medical field. Today we'll be talking about the Health Professions Scholarship Program and what it pays for. So we give you 100% scholarship for a four-year medical school. We also have 3-year scholarships as well. If for some reason you're not able to do that 4-year. We give you a $20,000 bonus right up front, minus taxes. We give you a monthly stipend of right under $2,500 a month for all your incidentals and stuff like this for 10.5 months out of the year. We also give you, during that year, you'll have to do a 45-day training, like the professional training to learn how to be a soldier and so forth. So we also give you right under $8 grand for that as well. And then we reimburse you for books and fees associated with your classroom. So we give quite a lot of stuff there. So in schooling, this is approximately what you'll be getting paid for. And the qualifications. So you must be a U.S. resident. You must have a GPA of at least 3.2 with an MCAT of no less than 500 with I think 124 in each category. We do have like a 1-point leniency. So if for some reason you don't quite make that, there is a little bit of leniency in there as well. So when you start talking to us, so we'd love for you to start talking to us on your 3rd and 4th year, so we can kind of start grooming you towards what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. It could be a lengthy process. I've seen students complete this process within 2 weeks, and some people take a few months. It just depends on how motivated you are to complete this process. Here's some of our residencies at a glance. These are mostly all of them. If you don't see what you want to do on there, it's not because we don't offer it. It's probably just because I just ran out of room and didn't put it on there. So our residency locations, some of the places you can go after you finish medical schooling. You can go to Hawaii. You can go to my hometown, San Antonio, Texas, Washington, Georgia, Virginia. So there's quite a few places that you can go during your residency. What you'd be paid for during residency, this is an approximation. So approximately $85,000 a year, and then one of my bosses did a little analyzing the California residency programs, and he was averaging, I guess, around $50,000 to $60,000 compared to ours. So as a U.S. Army active duty soldier, you'll be getting that 100% medical and dental coverage. You get 30 days paid vacation. And the big thing is no malpractice insurance. That's going to be huge when you guys are just finishing medical schooling, trying to get into a hospital or clinic or whatever you're trying to do. That no Now that malpractice insurance is going to be very high, I'm sure. And with the U.S. Army, we cover that. So that's another big, huge benefit. So I probably took a little bit less than 5 minutes, maybe without my boggle up there. But this is my information here. So if you guys are interested, want some more information, send me an email, and I can send you some more information through that as well. Thank you guys for having me. Y'all have a great weekend.
Hold on,
yeah.
Sergeant Rivas. Thank you so much for taking that was really quick, and thank you for taking a few minutes to come and join us today and share this opportunity with students. I know there are a lot of people here today who are going to be applying this upcoming cycle, and so I know I get asked a lot about this throughout every year in terms of when to start and how to do it. And so would you mind putting your contact information in the chat? There you go. Do you have an email maybe you can share as well? I know these students like emailing. They don't pick up the phone and call people anymore. And so does anybody have any questions, or is this something that anybody is considering and you want to just take a minute or two and ask a question of Sergeant Rivas while he's here? And if it is something you're thinking about and you're not sure what to ask, or if we actually have some alumni who have gone this route, and I can also put you in touch with them. They're very willing and active with HPA still. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the scholarship program, definitely reach out to me or Sergeant Rivas, and we can put you in touch with somebody who's done it. And you can ask them what it's like. I did have one question. I'm not sure you touched on it, or maybe I missed it. If somebody does go through the program, so they get their 4 years of med school paid for, and then what's the return? Like, what do they have to, how many years do they have to enroll in the Army as a medical, as an Army physician?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I did have that in my slideshow. I did take it out. I took out a lot of stuff to kind of condense for time. But definitely, so our payback is going to be, we give you 4 years of medical schooling, and then we give you your residency. So whichever is greater is going to be the payback. So potentially, if you wanted to do the longer residency of, say, surgeon, which a lot of you guys do, it's going to probably be a 6-year residency. So you're going to end up owing 6 years back to the U.S. Army. But just know that, any obligation you do serve with the U.S. Army or with any military branch, it's always going to be an 8-year obligation. So those last 2 years, you can do 3 different ways. You can stay active duty. You can go reserves, which is 2 days a month, 14 days a year, get paid for that as well. Or you can say, nope, I'm done. I'm going to go work for a hospital or do something different. And we put you on an inactive reserve. So kind of like a draft. If we were ever to be shorthanded for some reason, then we are able to call you back. So,
yeah.
Yep.
I think that idea of walking away from med school 100% debt-free and being free to do whatever work you want to do in your future without having the limitation of knowing you have a $2,000 student loan bill for the next 15 years of your life is really liberating for a lot of people. And I just want to also emphasize, because I think it's a really big misconception people have about this, is like, you're not going to be a soldier in the Army in the sense of like, you're not going to go to war as a military physician. You're going to work in a hospital, and you were going to be treating the soldiers and the soldiers' families. But this doesn't come at like a high risk to your life unless you are electing to do something that is putting you on the front lines. And so if you, like I said, if you are willing to, I guess what some people would consider, make that sacrifice for the first 8 years to be enlisted in the Army, either way, you're going to make a sacrifice whether you go in the Army or not, because you're going to pay student loans back. And so at some point, you're still going to be a slave to those student loans for a long time, because you're not going to be able to do whatever you want until those student loans are paid off. So I feel like this is a really, really good option for some people to consider. And so, like I said, if you have any questions, please talk to Sergeant Rivas or myself about it. Not pushing it on you by any means. I just think that it's something that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, I think they construe it with being a last resort. Oh, if I can't do anything else, let me get in the Army. Because that's the fallback, and that's like a huge misconception about the whole program, because we are very selective in who we pick and who we get to join our ranks. They're going to be your potential doctors are going to be taking care of our family members. So we are definitely selective in these choices that we give. This year we're giving away 290 scholarships. Last year we gave away 250. Last year I think we had a couple left over. This year they're gonna give them out before time even ends. So it's like totally different this year. So
That's
next year we'll
across the
see what
country.
happens.
290 for the country. So it is, I mean, you think about how many people are going to med school, 290 people is not a lot of people. So yeah, definitely competitive. Well, thank you so much, Sergeant Rivas, for coming and chatting with us. We hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Y'all take care. Good
Take
luck.
care.
Bye-bye.
All right. So we're going to jump into our topic for today. We're going to talk all about Amcas. For those who joined a few minutes late, welcome. We have a lot of people here today, so I'm really happy to see that, considering it's week 9. For those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Joanne. I'm the director of HPA, and Doug is our test specialist and my colleague, who I'm really happy to have here today with me. It's always fun to do things as a team. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint and share. If I can get this figured out.
And while she's presenting, I'll be in the chat box answering any questions you might have and all that fun stuff. So feel free to pop questions into the chat box.
Yeah. It's basically just closed my PowerPoint for some reason. Here we go. Can everybody see my presentation?
We've got it.
Okay. All right, so of all the things that we've talked about in MedPrep this year, we're coming to the end very soon. We only have a couple of months left. Of all the things we've talked about, it's sad to say that Amcas today is probably not going to be the most exciting and probably not the most interesting topic of all of them. However, I will say it's probably the issue or the topic that I get the most questions for. So all of us pre-health advisors, we get tons and tons of questions about the things I'm about to say. So if you are able to take notes, or if you're able to pay attention, or please go back and watch it in the future. First of all, everything I'm about to say is not like I didn't create this information. It does exist on websites. So you definitely can go into Amcas and download. They have a really nice like 60-page handbook every application year. And I actually encourage people to download that handbook and reprint it and have it as a booklet, because it will tell you everything you need to know about how to do different parts of the application. Amcas themselves also has an 800 number, which is really great. And sometimes people ask questions that are really specific to them. And I actually have to refer people over to call Amcas to answer those questions, because we see a lot of things at HPA, but we certainly can't, like, we are not the ones who have the final say on anything related to your application. And so if you're asking me, will this class or this class be counted as a science GPA, or will this, how should I, put in this really unique situation that I'm in, we're definitely going to refer you to Amcas to answer those questions. But today we're going to go through an application. I actually had one of my applicants from last year who just got accepted to med school send me pages of all of her applications. I really appreciate that. And we're going to go through the app, and I'm just going to give you as many tips as I can about filling out the different pages, and hopefully answer a lot of your questions along the way. So as you know me, I really appreciate you unmuting yourself and asking questions or posting in the chat throughout. I want to make sure that you're super clear about all the things. So just something about centralized apps in general. It's important to know that they're all different, and you might be applying to Amcas and ACOMAS, and those are also going to look very different, although the concepts are the same. They're just very different applications. However, what is similar across all centralized apps is that they are going to collect all of your transcripts and all of your letters of rec and all of your writing, and except for secondaries, and they're going to process those transcripts or verify them, that's what it's called. And they're going to create GPAs that are different than your Davis GPAs. They're different than any GPA you're going to see on any of your transcripts. And they're going to deliver that information to whatever schools you put on your app. And those schools are going to look only at the Amcas information to decide to make any decisions. So the med schools actually never see your Davis transcripts. They never see what's written on your transcript. So like transcript notation, not so helpful in this process because they don't see that. And that's something that for a lot of people, it's really shocking to them. They don't realize that, that people get really hung up on the Davis GPA, and they don't realize that that actually becomes very irrelevant when they get into the application. Centralized apps do calculate GPAs differently. So it's possible that if you apply to Amcas and ACOMAS, you might have two slightly different GPAs. And part of that is because they might calculate different classes into the science GPAs. And I haven't actually looked to see how different the point systems are, but they actually reassign grade points per grade to try to standardize the grading across universities, since they have so many different schools with different grading systems. So for your two applications, actually this year or starting last year, the character count is exactly the same. Centralized application systems don't actually check letter requirements, but they accept different amounts of letters. So for example, and I'll go through all this, but Amcas allows up to 10 letters, whereas ACOMAS only allows 4 letters. And for your purpose, they differ in disadvantage statements. So Amcas has a disadvantage statement and ACOMAS doesn't. But I'm going to go through all of those things. Just some Amcat specifics. So Amcas does count every class of the GPA, which is actually true for every school now, or every application. And they also include math in the science GPA, which is not true for other applications. So statistics, calculus, those are going to get included in your BCPM. For all apps, you can't update anything. You can't add letters of rec. You can change your address. You can change your name, your gender, but you can't change the writing. You can't add classes to the app after your app is submitted. And then Amcas also has the meaningful section. So these are the big pieces of an application, and this is what we're gonna go through a little bit today. So as you can see, the 2022 application cycle is going to open on May 3rd. So here are a couple of differences you need to listen and write down. So both Amcas and ACOMAS opens in May. However, with Amcas, you can't submit the application until it's usually the last week of May or beginning of June. And ACOMAS, you can submit the application as soon as you want. So if ACOMAS opens May 5th, you could technically submit ACOMAS May 6th. I don't know why you would do that, but you can do that. So depending on what your strategy is, every person's going to have a different strategy. There's no such thing as the best strategy. It depends on what your goals are. So some people might tell you that they're going to submit Amcas in May because they want the DO schools to know that DO is their #1 choice. And that might be a really strategic move based on what that person brings to the table. So if you said to that person, oh no, that's a terrible idea, you actually shouldn't submit your application to ACOMAS until September. That's what Joanne told me. Well, I might have told you that, but I might have told the other person something very different because you aren't on the same path. You don't have the same everything. So keep in mind, like I said, there's not a one best practice in this way. And I usually, when I tell people things, I'm usually tailoring what I tell them based on their circumstances. So the reason why it differs is ACOMAS processes applications very, very fast. So if you submit your application in May to ACOMAS, you will probably be verified within a week or two, and you will get screened within another week or two, and you might get invited to interview as early as June. That's pretty stressful. I mean, it's exciting. If DO is your first choice and that's where you want to be, then that's super exciting. You could be done with your application process by September and just chill for a year. However, if you're applying both MD and DO and you don't want to be done in September, and I can tell you what the negatives of being done in September for DO are, you're actually not going to start even being considered for interviews for most schools until August or September for Amcas. So in that case, you might want to wait and submit your your ACOMAS later so that the two cycles line up, so that you're being considered for interviews around the same time, which is why for some people submitting it in August means they'll start getting screened in September, and they'll start getting invites September, October, which is more closely aligns with the AMCAS process. Again, that just whatever decision you make about that should depend on what your priorities are. Any questions about that?
So if you think that like DO schools may align with your values more, then it's broadly okay to submit it like mid-May.
You can submit, absolutely. What's more important than submitting early is submitting a good application. So if you have an application that's you're sure it's perfect, you have no mistakes, you're confident about all of your writing, submitting mid-May is perfectly fine, and you'll be moving along faster in the DO. So let me tell you why some people, or yeah, why some people might not want to be accepted to DO schools really, really early. DO programs have a deposit that oftentimes ranges from $1,000 to $3,000, and they're non-refundable. Whereas MD schools deposits are $100 and refundable through April. So for MD schools, you're going to deposit everywhere. If you get 5 acceptances, you're going to probably deposit all of them, because why not, right? Like, you're going to get the money back anyway, and it's only $100. But if you have to cough up $2,000 and you're not going to get it back if you change your mind, for a lot of people, that's painful. And especially if you have 2 or 3 acceptances by September, now you're talking about, several $1,000s if you want to hold, if you're not sure yet. For a lot of people, just coming out of summer, they're like deer in headlights. They're so overwhelmed and just kind of PTSD from all the writing they had to do all summer, that the idea of like picking your school for the rest of your life, at that stage, it just feels too early. It's too fast. So there's nothing wrong. Like I said, if DO is probably where you're going to end up based on, things that we've talked about, then that might be really good for you to have that acceptance early and be really confident, especially if you're going into the cycle feeling really insecure and feeling nervous. Having that acceptance early will do wonders for your self-esteem, right? It'll make you feel like good. And then anything that happens after that, you feel solid. Like, at that point, no matter what, you're going to be a doctor. Doesn't matter what happens after that. So it just depends on your priorities for yourself, and you need to make that decision. It's not that there is a right way or a better way. It is going to be based on what you want, how you want to feel, and how much money you're willing to pop up. It's painful though. I've had many students really struggle with that.
Do people usually like, I've like read online, like put down a deposit and then pull out? I mean, not like they get the refund, but
Yeah, people deposit and lose their money all the time, but if you don't have a lot of money to waste thousands of dollars, then that's hard, right? It's a very inequitable process.
Okay.
So if you have unlimited funding and you can deposit multiple schools and still proceed in the process to consider more, that's fantastic for you. But not everybody has that situation. So it causes, like I said, it causes a lot of people stress to have acceptances that early. There's still a good chance you're going to be accepted even if you apply in July or August and push it out a little bit. But when you apply early to DO, what the DO schools see is, oh, wow, this is someone who's really interested in us because they applied to us before Amcas. That's how they perceive that. So if you really do want to get into DO and you apply early, that does increase your chances of being looked at. If you apply, let's say in September, October, what's the opposite thing they're going to think? They're using me as a backup, right? Like, they applied to Amcas first, they got their secondaries done, and then they finally thought of us and they're going to use us as a backup, which they know most people do that. But, it doesn't make anybody feel good to be someone's backup. So, just, you got to kind of manage that a little bit. You got to think about, again, what's most important to you. This is what Amcas looks like when you first go to it and you're ready to log in. And this is what ACOMAS looks like. So very, very different looking applications. ACOMAS uses these quadrants, which I find to be really nice and simple to understand. But basically, you're going to have 2 accounts, 2 logins to everything. You're going to have to track 2 pieces of information. So we're going to go through each section of the application first, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about each section with a slide as we go through. And then, like I said, please just ask questions through. So the first section, when someone opens up your app, the first thing they're going to look at is your biographic information section. And in this section, they're going to start to form a narrative of you and who you are based on a lot of words and numbers. So this isn't, there isn't a lot of writing here, but this is just where they start to make some assumptions and draw some conclusions. So for example, you'll have your parents' occupations in here. You'll have your household income. You'll have the languages you speak. You'll have how many people live in your house. You'll have how your college education was paid for. So they ask you to break down how you paid for college based on a list of options, and then you break out by percentage how you paid for it. So for example, if you put that you received 100% grants to pay for college, then when they see that, they automatically know that you must have went into college coming from a lower income household. So you don't have to declare that about yourself anymore, right? Like they just know that. If they see that your parents paid 100% out of pocket, and now I have had situations where that's a little unfair because sometimes parents saved their whole lives. It doesn't mean that they were wealthy. It just means they saved and they paid for the kids' education. But there is oftentimes some type of stigma with parents who pay for all of the education. So in that case, you would want to, if your parents made huge sacrifices to pay for your education, you might actually want to talk about that in your disadvantage statement as an economic disadvantage and just bring that up. If you don't have any info for any of your parents, then you would let's see, so you put whatever like info you have. You have their names, if you know their occupations, if you know their education levels, you can put that. I'm not sure, sorry, what kind of information are you talking about? You should know how you paid for college, though. That shouldn't have anything to do with your parents. So if you use loans or you use grants, but that's the kind of stuff that they are asking. When I see a couple of questions here. For how I pay for college, is it just tuition? It doesn't really specify. It's just how you pay for college. It doesn't literally say how I paid for college. It's like your college expenses broken down. Okay, so with the biographic information section, like I said, what it does is it starts to create some context for the rest of your story. So this is where you kind of want to make sure things make sense. I've had situations where someone, created a picture of economic disadvantage in their disadvantage statement and whatnot. But then in their personal statement, they wrote that every year their family of 5 flew to India and donated goods to those living in poverty. And I had to take a step back. I was like, wait a second. You're telling me that your family lived in poverty, but every year you took an international vacation. I also lived in poverty as a child, and the only vacation we ever took was a couple hours away. We definitely weren't buying international flights anywhere. And so, that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, right, to most people. So you want to make sure that your story makes sense to people. And I'm not saying, maybe it's true that you can take international flights every year if you're living in poverty. Generally speaking, that's really hard to do for most people. So thinking about that, and that's those kind of like discrepancies, hopefully an advisor or somebody will point out to you if that kind of thing happens. Yes, Pallavi.
No, I'm so sorry. That was an accident.
Oh, okay. No problem. You're just testing it out. That's what I meant by the historic level of disadvantage. There is the disadvantage statement, which I'll talk about next, but making sure that everything jives. And then you're going to have your preferred and permanent address. And the only reason I put that is because you want to make sure that you're putting your address, the preferred address where you're actually living, or not putting the address where sometimes it's an issue where like permanent address where your parents are, or how, like, if you don't think that it's a good place for mail to be sent in relation to your application process, like sometimes they'll mail your acceptance letter, or sometimes they'll mail your financial aid package, or just documents related to your acceptance later. And if there, if any of that information you don't want your family to have access to, then just make sure you're managing your addresses correctly in the beginning. They also ask you for secondary contacts, and I think that it's really good to be thinking about who else you might want to answer the phone in the event that they start calling you, because they do call. They'll call you for interview invites, they'll call you for acceptances, and if they can't reach the number listed, they'll call every number on your application. So if you do want to know things right away, if you miss a call and you want them to keep calling you, you can list multiple phone numbers and just make sure that you're listing it with people who will get in touch with you in the event that a med school calls you. But calling you is a very real thing. They will do that. And I've had people tell me, and I used to actually do this practice myself, where I had a really last minute interview spot open up and I had someone who I knew wanted to come, and I just called them to ask them if they could come to the interview like a day or two later. And when they didn't answer, I needed to know right then because I was trying to figure things out. So I would just call someone else, and I just offered the spot to the first person who answered the phone. And so that's a thing. And I actually had someone who told me that that happened to them this season with a different school, that they were called and they called them back and they said the offer is no longer there because they needed an answer right away. Not to scare you, but just to kind of give you an idea of how that situation can work out. Schools also call applicants later in the process if they're going to accept you off the wait list to ask you if you still want to come. So they won't accept you if you say, no, I'm not interested in coming, so they don't waste an acceptance and then raise their admission or their acceptance rate. So legal names can be changed, and this is kind of basic, it just kind of shows you what it looks like. I just put this because it does ask you for your ID numbers. Please do put your UC Davis ID number because that's how they can help find a missing transcript if need be. Transcripts should be attached to transcript request forms when you send them. But in the event that something gets lost somewhere, you want to, and not just UC Davis, let's say you attended a community college, just list every student ID that you have on there so that they have it. This is what the gender and sex page looks like. I'm really happy to see that they added more identifiers under gender. That's a new thing just in the last couple of years. And if you have any questions when you're filling this out, feel free to read their directions or come ask an HPA advisor and we'll do our best. But they give you more options now. They ask you about institutional action. I wanted to talk for just a minute about this. So institutional action has historically meant things like violations like candles or drinking in the dorms or something like that. But it also could include things like plagiarism, like being caught cheating and, hopefully not past your first or second year, but, sometimes that happens. So any type of conduct violation. So that's an obvious yes. So if you had a conduct violation, you probably need to report it. I can't think of a situation where you would not want to report it. I know people really try to get slick with this and they're like, well, it comes off my record after a year. While that is true, I think that it's very dangerous lying to a med school. And let's say you think you got away with it, and then somehow, some way they find out about it, and what's the ramification? They'll rescind your acceptance, and you think you're going to med school, and then you have to tell your whole family you're not going to med school, and why you're not going to med school, which I don't know if it's worse for that to happen or just be honest about it up front. Lots of people do things like that in college. I mean, we used to joke when I worked at the med school that, alcohol violations in the dorms were a prereq because it was just so common for people to have that on their record. So, I just want to encourage you to be ethical and honest in that situation. I know a lot of people don't want to be, but it almost is always better to be honest about something rather than try to hide something. Another way that I have told people to use this section in the past, which is kind of unconventional, but sometimes people are put on academic probation or SD during college, which again, very normal and it happens. And however, there isn't really any place on your application to explain why, what happened. So this isn't exactly asking, it does say unacceptable academic performance, but it's not exactly asking for that. But if you put yes, it gives you 1325 characters to explain what happened. So for example, if you had academic probation in your first year because, something happened or you hadn't figured out your study habits or something like that, and you put yes, then you can explain why you were put on probation and what and the changes you made to yourself in order to overcome that and persist and do well. And again, like that's a good place to talk about that, right? Like, because you don't get a lot of chances to explain why you might have had a rocky quarter or a rocky year. And so I've actually had a lot of people do that. I haven't heard anything bad happen because they did that. So it's something to consider if that applies to you. This is what I was talking about, having alternative contacts. And so definitely want to do that. I want to talk about state of legal residence. I think most of you are probably California residents, but if you are thinking about not being a California resident for any reason, it does say here that you need to do the research yourself. They don't provide a really clear guide, or I guess they don't check a lot of things. In my experience, med schools rarely spend the energy checking residency. I mean, that's a lot of work to do for a lot of people. I mean, they're not going to check you during the application phase. They may check during your acceptance phase, but I still highly doubt that. I think that most people identify with a state of residence based on where it's almost like a personal identity, like where do you feel like you're from. But I've seen many people in the past who maybe grew up in a state but then moved away for grad school, and they lived in that state for 3 or 4 years and they count that as their new state because that's where they're happy and they like it there. Yeah, so if you put no to the previous question, if you're an international student, then you wouldn't see this question. That makes sense. This asks you for your identity. And again, this is, self-identified. Nobody's obviously checking anything. So you should identify however you do. However, I think there is some controversy about people who have identified in certain ways when they have like zero connection to that community. Like, for example, if they know their great grandma was half Puerto Rican, they'll put their Puerto Rican, even though they've never met their grandma, they never spoke Spanish, they never stepped foot in Puerto Rico, that kind of thing. And med schools are pretty privy to that at this point. They're kind of sensitive to that because a lot of people try to do that. And so if you do identify on here as belonging to any type of underrepresented group in medicine, then I would encourage you in another part of your application to talk about the ties that you have to that community. Being tied to that community and being interested in serving that community and showing how you can be effective in that community because of the experiences that you've had working in that community or other communities that are underserved, just making those parallels is what's going to help you in that process. But just simply checking off these boxes, they will spend some time analyzing that in the context of everything else you say. And if you have zero connection back, it's not going to get you very far. Any questions about that? So if you have multiple identities, check off all that apply. All right, so they ask you how many people live in your house. And this is that page I was telling you about in terms of how do you pay for it. So it says, how have you paid for your post-secondary education? It doesn't say specifically tuition or cost of attendance. I think you can consider all of it in that. Doug, there's somebody in the waiting room. I don't know if you want to let them in. Okay. Any questions about this at all? I know this is. Okay. You will be doing a background check before you start med school. Every med school in the country uses it. They used to use this company called Certify. And so once you get accepted, or usually around January, you'll start getting an email from this company named Certify asking you to put a lot of your personal information into a form. And you might be a little taken aback by that because you're like, wait, you want my what? But that's normal. And they usually will tell you it's coming. If you are worried on any level about having a criminal record, I highly recommend that you pull a background check yourself and see what's on there. Because if you think that you might have something on your background check, it would be really good to disclose that on your application. If you don't disclose it and then they see it on the background check, you're in worse trouble than if you had the problem to begin with. So if, let's say, 3 years ago you got pulled over and you had something in your system and you got a DWI, you can talk about how you dealt with that, overcame that, you would never do it again, all of that in your application. But it'd be far worse if they figured that out through. At that point, you're probably going to get your acceptance rescinded, which again, really hard to explain to your parents, right? Any questions about that? This doesn't apply to most people, but it does come up every year. Okay, so disadvantage status in Amcas. This is Amcas only. There are those 3 types of disadvantage, and people are self-identified as disadvantaged. So there is not an actual checklist or anything like that. You would personally identify that. And so the ways that we think about this are, I actually call it academically rather than social, but the way you think about it is K through 12. Did you go to, or did you have an educational experience that was subpar? Did you go to schools that were under-resourced? Did you feel coming into college that you just weren't as academically prepared as you should have been? And you would want to maybe look up the schools you went to see if they are flagged as being sort of like high-risk schools. And that's one way to figure it out. And so you can talk about that as being a disadvantage. Economic, a good indicator is whether you had free or reduced lunch or you qualified for any services as a child. This is for predominantly below age 18. If the majority of your life you were using some type, but your family was receiving some type of services or aid, and then, and when you were 17, your parents got a job, a really good job, and everything was great after that, that's fine, that's great, but you would still consider it because the majority of your childhood was economically disadvantaged. So, and then the environmental disadvantage is a little bit more, subjective in that some things you could consider would be disadvantage would be you lived in a neighborhood that was unsafe, or it could either be like in terms of like toxicology, or just unsafe in terms of crime. You lived in a household that was toxic or unsafe, meaning there was severe mental illness in the house leading to abuse or substance abuse. If you witnessed severe alcoholism or drug abuse in your home and that affected you as a child, that would be an example of an environmental disadvantage. And so I've seen people who came from physician households who talked about being environmentally disadvantaged because someone in their household had severe mental illness, and then there was some abuse in the household. And so your financial background has nothing to do with that. And so you just want to reflect on that and decide if that's something you want to share. Clear things would be experiencing homelessness, experiencing any type of abuse yourself. Now, some people choose not to talk about a disadvantage. Even though like I would consider them to be disadvantaged, they don't want to identify that way, and that is totally fine. There is a high probability that the schools are going to know you were disadvantaged based on the other stories you tell about yourself in your personal statement and in your biographic information section. And so if they deem that you were disadvantaged and then you choose not to say you were disadvantaged, it actually has a positive effect because they think that I don't know why, but identifying as disadvantaged doesn't have a negative effect either. And the reason why is you actually get flagged most of the time and get put into a smaller screening pile. So if you're put into a smaller screening pile in an application, a med school application process, that's a really good thing. Like you really want to be considered against fewer people. If they have 6,000 applicants and only 1,000 of them are disadvantaged, then yeah, you're only going to be compared against the 1,000, not the 6,000. So there are advantages like that to being disadvantaged. But here's the thing. Let's say you're like, oh yeah, absolutely, I want to be in the 1,000 person pile. Now, how many people in that 1,000 person pile had extreme disadvantages? So when someone puts something like, well, my parents got divorced when I was age 10 and I had to go back and forth, between houses for the rest of my life, and that affected me. And then the next person, the person reads is, I lived in a hotel for 6 years and, my mother suffered from a meth addiction. Well, clearly, like, everything is relative and this whole process is subjective. So if the person who just, read about the homeless person, they're going to have some emotional response to that. And then when they read the person who says, my parents got divorced, they're going to be like, yeah, so did mine. Everybody's parents got divorced. Like, that's pretty common. 50% of American parents are divorced. So, there's going to be some reaction to that. So being compared to a smaller group isn't a good thing always. Depends on what you have to say. And that's where, if you're not sure if you have a disadvantage, then I would write it out. It's only 1325 characters, which is a nice paragraph, and bring it to an advisor. And then we'll just tell you what we think when we read it. And you can decide if you like what we think or not. If we're telling you like, it kind of makes me, think not, and you can get 2 or 3 different opinions and go with that. Any questions? It's 1325 characters, so a nice chunky paragraph. So when you write your disadvantage statement, you really need to just state things as facts. You're not going to tell a story so much as just tell me what happened. And so this is just very matter of fact.
So like real quick, I went to like a high school where in like LA County, and every year they would give us a letter that said that like our school wasn't performing well. So if we wanted to go to another school that like did perform well on exams, like do you think that would count as like academically disadvantaged?
Well, I think you have to tack more onto that. I mean, you can't just say I got a letter in the mail every year. You'd have to tell them how it affected you.
Yeah.
So if, for example, in your AP biology classes, your instructor played Jeopardy and never taught you biology, or, played the show Jeopardy on TV, I mean, I actually had a high school teacher who would do that, who would play The Price is Right during class every day in a AP geography class. And so that would be a disadvantage because you didn't get the foundational knowledge that you needed in order to do well in your college biology classes. And when, other people who went to good high schools and got that type of education had a clear advantage in their Biz 2 series, right?
Right, that actually happened. It was AP Bio, and she planned her wedding and played hangman on the board.
There you go. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. So that's the kind of thing you would document. And if it was very prevalent in a lot of your, senior year classes, you would definitely point that out. If you want to look up your high school graduation rate and just if it's extremely low, or things like that, like the free and reduced lunch percentage is also oftentimes an indicator that the school is under-resourced. There's correlations, not causation, but yeah. So you can write it out and then let someone read it, and then we can give you some feedback on that. Okay, so this is the page I was telling you about with your parents' information, and so you can see it does ask for, and you can add more than 2 parents. So if your parents are divorced and remarried, I believe you can put more than 2. I think that's a new change. Hope I'm not wrong about that. I know that was up for discussion a couple of years ago. But if you don't have 2 parents and you only have 1 parent, then you can list just 1 parent as well. But you put their occupation, their education level, and where they're living. Any questions about that? Pretty straightforward. Okay, now this is the hottest topic, and I'm going to say a lot of things, and I want everyone to perk up. I want everyone to listen really, really closely to the things I'm about to say, because I'm going to say it, and then I know we're going to get asked a million times. So, you can also listen and tell other people. That would be really helpful too. Okay, so here we go. When you enter in your coursework to the application system, you are going to want to have a copy of your official transcript in front of you. And the reason why is because the official transcript is not the same as what shows up in OASIS. Now, you can download your official transcript and look on your computer. That's fine. But I'm talking about using your transcript versus OASIS or whatever system, whatever it's called. So you have to copy your transcript exactly as it appears into your application. So what does that mean? Like, what do we call the biology series here at UC Davis? We call it the Biz 2 series, right? We say Biz 2 A, B, and C. But how do you think you're going to enter it into Amcas? Anybody know? Nope. The acronym. Nope. It's BIOL, B-I-O-L. That's right, Doug. Good job, Doug. And so there are lots and lots of differences like that. And you cannot put in what you think it is. You have to put in exactly what it says on your transcript. And if you don't, it's a mistake. And if you have 10 mistakes, they send the whole application back to you to redo. And you don't want that to happen after you've submitted. And first of all, when you submit your app, you're going to get in line to get read. So just getting in line to get read, to get verified, might take 2 weeks. So you waited 2 weeks, and then you find out once they opened it to verify that you made all these mistakes. You have to redo it, then get back in line. Now you've prolonged your whole application for like another 2 to 3 weeks. So that's going to be stressful to you. So you're going to enter every course from every school you ever attended, not high school, every college level school you ever attended. Let's say you took basket weaving in 8th grade, and then that transferred to your community college, a different one, and then you transferred it to Davis. So it actually appears on your Davis transcript. Do you have to send the transcript to Amcas? Yes or no? Post in chat. Do you have to send the transcript for the basket weaving class? Thank you. You're like my honors applicants, because people sometimes don't get that. If it appears on your Davis transcript and you took it at another school, that's exactly why you have to send the transcript, because if they see that you took a class somewhere else and they don't have a transcript for it, they will not verify your app. They will tell you. You do include AP classes, but you do not need to include AP score reports. So that's a little tricky. On your official transcripts, AP classes are not broken out. But on OASIS, your AP classes are broken out. IB would be a college level class, I believe. Dewani, double check. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on this, but I believe you got a transcript for that, correct? Yeah, if you got a transcript, you send a transcript. So for AP real quick, if you're using AP classes to satisfy a prereq for med school, then you want to look at your OASIS and copy the courses from OASIS that you got AP credit for, and make sure the units match the units that are on your official transcript. So if your official says you got 6 units of AP credit, which is all it will say, don't go in and put 7 units of AP credit on your application, because they're going to kick it back to you. But let's say you're not using any of your AP credit for anything related to med school. Let's say you took art history and history of whatever, and it's just they don't count for anything. You don't need to list those courses. Nobody cares. No, literally nobody cares about your AP credit. So you don't need to put that. You can just put AP credit 6 units, and that's good enough. They only would care if the school is going to accept your AP credit for a prereq. And some schools don't even accept your AP credit. So in that case, they certainly don't care. But if you are trying to use your AP credit to satisfy a prereq, then you need to first make sure that you're applying to schools that accept it, or that you do meet the requirements for it in terms of having enough units. And then you would break it out. Whew, any questions about that?
So if we have an AP class on a transcript, then we typically put it down, or no?
No, so they don't care about graduation requirements. That's not a thing for them. They care about their prereqs. So if you are using a AP course to satisfy a prereq, you would put it on your application. You would break it out. You would name the class. So let's say you took statistics, AP statistics in high school, and that counts towards your 1 year of math. Then you would put, stats 13 AP. You would list it out exactly as it appears on OASIS on your Amcas.
Oh, okay.
If it doesn't count as a prereq, then my point is nobody cares. You can just put AP credit 6 units.
Okay.
If you studied abroad and it's on your Davis transcript, so study abroad is the exception. You don't need to have the transcript sent from the international school. Fun fact, Amcas does not accept international coursework. ACOMAS does accept international coursework. So if you had, let's say, gone to another country in the summer, not through study abroad, and just took a class at another university abroad, for Amcas, it's just out the window. It's not going to help you or hurt you. It's completely irrelevant. You don't list it. For ACOMAS, though, you would have to send that to WES, W-E-S, the transcript services, and then they'll send it to ACOMAS. And yes, you do have to list it. But study abroad should be listed as UC Davis courses because it's through UC Davis. You paid for it through UC Davis. It's a UC Davis course. And they have a really nice tutorial on an Amcas about entering study abroad coursework. So when you get to that section, there's going to be links and videos for you to watch if you're confused. It's really very clear.
Jeannie had a follow-up about since all AB classes are not used for med school prereqs, can we just add up all the units?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you get into Amcas, there's going to be a section about that. So just read what it says and follow the directions. It'll tell you how to enter everything in, but it's going to tell you to enter in your AP, but you don't have AP, like I said, on your official. So it's going to be, that's the part that's a little wonky for UC Davis. I know you're asking about IB, but I think it's the same thing. If you have, I'm not as familiar with IB as I am with AP. I literally have been doing this for 6 years and then 4 years before this. And I literally just, it doesn't like ever come up as a topic in my advising appointments. So I don't think it's as confusing as maybe I'm making it out to seem, because people figure it out because I've not asked about it ever. So I think it's going to be pretty easy when you get in there to figure out how to do it. If you got the basic thing is if you took a class through a university and you have a transcript for that university and it says on Davis's transcript that you have a course from a different university, that's when you need a transcript from that university. That's it. That's the really clear indication. If you know that you have classes out there in the universe that didn't transfer to Davis and you're technically supposed to send all of those courses and transcripts to Amcas, like that's what you're supposed to do. Do people ask me if they can get away with that? Sure, people ask me all the time. And I'm always going to tell you that what you're supposed to do. I'm not going to tell you to do things that are incorrect. If you choose not to do what you know you're supposed to do, then that's your decision and you have to deal with the ramifications of that if they find out. But I'm going to tell you that you're supposed to send every transcript. Yeah, Madeline, you can do, it literally doesn't matter. You can list them out if it makes you feel happy. The med schools don't care about your AP classes. So if you want to list them all out just so they can see what classes you took in high school, that's totally cool. It's not going to make any difference in this process. So it's up to you. Some people list them, some people don't. Yeah. Let's keep going. This is what the prereq page in ACOMAS looks like. And the reason I wanted to include this is because ACOMAS makes you do this really fun thing. After you've listed in all of your courses, and that's a different section of the application, they have a page for every school that asks you, so this is, you can see this is the AT Still school. Every school has this prereq tab where it lists the school's prereqs. So let's say AT Still requires biochem, physics, OChem, and physio, let's say. You have to go in and from your schools or from your courses that you listed on the other section, you have to match the requirements for each school's prereqs. So for example, it says a year of bio. So you would put Biz 2A, B, and C. It says physiology. So you would put NPB 110C or NPB 101. And so they make you basically do their screening yourselves, which is really a pain in the butt for you because it's a lot of data, data entry sort of. This shouldn't cause you a high degree of stress, but for some reason it does cause people a high degree of stress. People ask me, should I put the class with the highest grade? This is not calculating a GPA. This is only checking to see if you have the requirement. So should I put every biology class I ever took? Again, This is not a race to see how many biology classes you took. This is to see that you've met the minimum requirements for the school. So if they need 1 year of biology, put biz to A, B, and C, unless you got straight D's in that, in which case, at that point, you haven't met the requirement because they require a C or better. And in that case, you would need to put upper div biology like genetics or microbiome or cell bio. Whether they accept that or not is going to be up to them, but that would be what you would do in that case if you have a course where you have a C- or below in it and it's required for the school. Any questions about that? Did you all know you're going to have to do that? I find that this section throws a lot of people off. It's a major pain. You're going to want to carve out, a little extra time in your life to do all of this. So this is all going to be happening in May. So I don't know what you had planned for May, but clear your calendars because this is what you're going to be doing. Good times. Same thing, July, August. Go ahead and clear the calendars for those months too. You're going to be busy. All right. In both applications, it does ask you to indicate whether you're taking a future exam. And the reason why they do that is because they will usually hold your application until your future test date. So Amcas and MCAT are the same people. They literally sit in the same room together. So for them, it's almost automatic. They actually will insert your test date automatically in there. ACOMAS, you do have to indicate because ACOMAS and MCAT are not the same people. So you'll have to give them a little bit more information about your future test date. But they will hold your app. So let's say you took it once before and you have, let's say, a 505. And that's good enough for most schools to screen, but let's say you plan to retake it and you're hoping to get a 510 and you want them to look at the 510. So because you put that, they'll hold your app. You can have everything done and ready. You can do your secondaries. You'll get your secondaries because you met the screen, but they'll wait and send your app to a reader until your next test score comes out. So for example, if you are taking the MCAT again in September, your score won't come out till October, which means your app won't be read till October. Now, who thinks that's a really good idea to be screened in October? Any takers? Yeah, probably not, right? Probably not a good idea to be screened in October. So I know some people do that, and a few people get away with it every year. But generally speaking, most schools have already sent out the bulk of their invites for most of their interview spots by September, October. And so if you are complete in October and just starting the screening process in October, by October, because keep in mind, they start reading apps in July, they've already read thousands of apps. They are so far past that. They're so kind of done, like emotionally done with the process, that unless you are like an absolute phenomenal applicant that stands out in some amazing way, it's very hard to catch their attention at that point. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are people who have applied later and it has worked out for them. But I just know if we're talking about being the most strategic, it would not make sense for most of you to do it that way. If that is the only way you can do it and you insist on applying this cycle, then you'll do it, right? And don't feel bad about it, just do it. That's how you have to do it. But if you had the option, I would tell you not to do it that way. I would tell you to try to take the MCAT by like July at the latest and get your score in by August. That way you're still kind of in the running and they're still screening apps in August. People are still submitting secondaries in August. So there's any questions about MCAT scores and dates and timelines and all that? Okay. Most applicants or most schools will accept the last 3 years of an MCAT, but I actually would check that yourself for certain schools if that's an issue with you, because it's not every school is 3 years. That's not like a standard policy, that's school specific. People often ask me how schools, or the question I hear from students is, how will they consider my multiple scores, or or how will they see it, or something like that. And med schools see everything. They see and consider everything. I'm not sure what that question actually means. So everything you do in your application creates a narrative for yourself, and you control that to some degree, but you can't control the way people think. So let's say hypothetically, you took the MCAT once, you got a 505, and you took it again and you got a 510. You know, we can imagine what some possible narratives are. You know, as human beings, we can imagine someone might think, well, they weren't as prepared as they could have been for the 505. They must have done some things different. They did much better. That's great. So taking it twice and doing much better the second time shows persistence. It shows you were able to assess yourself and figure out what went wrong and change methods and do much better the second time. Those are all very positive qualities that you would actually want them to think about you, right? Having the 505 isn't going to keep you out of med school if you have a 5010. It's not that you don't want them to see the 505, because the 505 to 510 jump creates a narrative that helps you out. Let's say you went from a 507 to a 507. You didn't go anywhere, right? It's the same. So what are some possible narratives that they might think about that? Well, they'll say, okay, so 507 is about what this person can do. At least they tried again. They didn't, they didn't accept a 507 as, they thought they could do better. They might look at when you took the test. So let's say you took the test 1 month apart. Now that might be a judgment issue. They might go, why would they do that? Like, why would they take the test so close together unless they thought they could do something seriously different? In that case, they might think something went really wrong the first time and that you were prepared and you thought you were prepared for a better test. And so, there's all kinds of things that are going to be going through their head. At the end of the day, you have the 507. So it is what it is. Trying twice, again, not going to keep you out of med school. Many people have gotten into med school taking the MCAT more than one time. Now, let's say you have the dreaded situation where your score goes down. I think a lot of that depends on what the scores are to begin with and how much they go down. So let's say hypothetically you go from, you had a 510 and you pushed your limits and you're like, I'm going to try for a 515, and then you get a 509. Oh, you're going to feel bad, right? You're not going to be happy about that. Now, they're still going to see that you had the 510. Is there fundamentally a huge difference in the quality of you as a future physician between a 509 and a 510? Like, let's be real. Is it really going to make any difference in the larger scheme of things between those two scores? I promise you, not at all. They're going to look at that and go, well, the second test was obviously a bad test day. Something could, they know you get asked different questions on different tests. You could have been sitting under a vent. Maybe, something bad happened that day. You had food poisoning. Who knows? Lots of things could happen. But let's say you go from a 510 to a 504. Now they're going to have some questions, right? They're going to probably assume something really bad happened the second time, but that inconsistency on that drastic level, they're going to probably ask you about that. And so you're going to want to have something prepared to talk about. And you might even talk about that in one of your secondary questions. If they say, is there anything you want us to know? You might tell them what happened in that second test, because that is going to maybe raise a question or two. So Alex asked Ali asked a good question. Should we order them when we start the app? Yeah. So as soon as you open up your application, and when you're gonna open up your application in May, that's actually the next slide. Let me go here. Yep. So as soon as you open up your applications, you're gonna go in and you're going to list all of the schools that you attended. And every time that you list a school, it's going to create this box here that says transcript or create a transcript request form. So you're going to click that box and it's going to open up a PDF that's going to have a unique transcript ID and a link, a barcode. For Davis, transcripts are sent electronically. So if you go to the registrar's website at Davis, it's going to ask you for your Amcas ID number and that transcript ID number. And you're going to enter those numbers in, and it will send the transcripts directly to Amcas. And it usually takes about 24 hours. So you don't want to do this before, you cannot do this, you should not do this before you open up your application. You wouldn't have your transcript ID number. So you shouldn't go to the registrar's website and order a transcript to be mailed to Amcas. It will go in the trash. They only accept transcripts that are attached to an application to have a unique identifier. Let's say you went to a different school that isn't as fancy as Davis and they don't have electronic submission. So with that transcript request form, you're actually going to print it, scan it, or whatever you want. You're going to get that to the school, and you're going to have them attach that form to the transcript when they mail it to Amcas. The transcript has to be attached to a transcript request form so that Amcas knows what to do with that transcript. They get 50,000 applications, so they get a lot of transcripts, right? And you consider most people attend more than one school. So you can imagine what that process is like for them. So you want to have that transcript request form. And so you would do this as soon as you open up your app, unless you're waiting for your spring grades, which I'm not sure why you would do that. Any questions about the transcript part?
I do. So like our transcript, let's say it's gonna be different later, right? When spring grades are
Then you
done.
wouldn't, no, you can't send it, there are no updates. So if you want your spring grades in your app, then you can't submit your app until your spring grades are on your transcript.
Right. I mean, I'm not waiting for my spring grades. I just, will they accept? I don't know.
No, you can't update your app. So once you submit your application, that's it, you're done. There's no updates to your grades at that point.
I just meant like, are they going to be like, I don't see a degree on here? Type
Nope,
of-
okay, so when you get accepted to med school, in the late spring, like before July, they're usually due July 1st, you have to send official transcripts directly to the school you're gonna go to. They verify your prereqs, so allopathic schools don't verify your prereqs until the spring, right before you start. And that's when they'll verify your degree. So Amcas doesn't verify your degree or anything like that. So no, you don't need to send any updates to Amcas in relation to your grades. Med
Oh.
schools, does that make sense?
Yeah, I just thought they were going to be like, I don't see a degree here, but I'm not waiting.
No, they don't verify that.
Okay.
Yeah, so your degree is not part of the verification process. So Amcas doesn't care at all if you have your degree. Most people don't have their degrees by the time they apply. Not most, some people don't have their degrees when they apply because they're applying going straight through. So they wouldn't have their degree on there. So that's not even a thing to verify your degrees. I was about to say something about Amcats versus a comment. I don't know. Come back to me. Let me see some of these questions.
So Madeline's
So-
asking, do you recommend waiting until spring grades?
Well, I mean, I guess I would ask, I think it depends on if you're in the process of building your upward trend. So let's say you had a really rocky third year of college, and the way that your fourth year looks is going to make a major impression on the screener for you. So if you are going for a year of straight A's and you're getting straight A's in your third quarter and you really need that you need that list of A's to be longer, in that case, I probably would, just because, especially if right before the list of A's, it's really rocky, really bad, then having more A's on your transcript is going to help you. If you've had an upward trend for 2 years, then one more quarter isn't going to make a significant difference, and I wouldn't wait for it. Yeah. Does that make sense, Madeline?
Then, if a community college mails transcripts, can you explain how that works again?
Yep. So you're gonna, once you add in that school, you'll come in here and you'll open up a transcript request form, and you'll either save it as a PDF or print it. And you'll need to contact that school or look on their website to find out how they prefer that, you get that to them. Now, think about how many people have applied to med school over the years. I'm sure they have a process that's built, either an upload button or they have something that's going to tell you what to do. So going to their website, the registrar website, and seeing how they'd like that done. And then you just need to do that research before May, so you have an idea what to expect. And you're going to send that transcript to the community college when you request your transcript. So most schools have like a transcript request form at the school. And then you're going to attach the Amcas request form to your request at the school. That's a lot of words for transcript request. Does that make sense? Or
And Madeline has a follow-up. If we submit a transcript before spring grades are available, should we not list the courses under coursework section?
you put in progress. So you're going to put your spring grades. It'll just say in progress. That's an option on Amcas to select that. So it'll say in progress until you matriculate at a school, until you're accepted, and then you send your official transcripts to that one school. You only send your transcripts to one school. So you're gonna have to do the whole transcript request thing again in the spring, a year later. And that's usually when, like I said, they cross-check everything and make sure you took everything. When they accept you, they'll sometimes look, and they'll usually, if they do care, they'll say you're accepted contingent upon successful completion of, your last physics class. And at that point, you realize, oh shoot, I'm missing the second physics. I'm gonna have to go scramble and take that online somewhere at a community college to get it done before I start med school on July 1st. I'm sure Doug will answer you, but yes, you can use HPA forever. We don't cut people off at any point. There's a way to PDF your applications, and we usually ask that you send a PDF to us if you're wanting us to look at your application. It's just easier for us to look at. All right, did I get everybody's questions? I promised you this wasn't going to be super exciting content,
Yep.
but
It looks
hopefully
like
it's
we're caught
helpful.
up so far.
Okay. I want to talk for just a second about majors, because this is also something that is fun and interesting every year. So anybody here an NPV major? Ah, yes, lots of NPV majors, pre-meds. Well, guess what? Good news, bad news. I mean, there's no NPV major in Amcas. So you chose NPV because it sounded really cool, but in Amcas, you're gonna have to choose a different major. So you're gonna choose a major that is as close to NPV as you want it to be. You can choose physiology, you can choose neuroscience, it doesn't matter. But there is no literal NPV major. Yeah, I know, Allie, every year I hear this. Do your best. You can't get it wrong. Just pick a major off the list that makes the most sense for you. You can literally put whatever you want, Pallavi. They don't know or care. They don't see your transcripts, so they're not going to know any different. So did you declare a minor? If you did, you put it, just to be brutally honest with you, it's not going to have a huge impact on this process. It's just cool if you have like a cool minor. But if you didn't, like, don't stress at this point. Don't go rush out and like take a bunch of classes just to get a minor. It's not that they're expecting one. It's just that because so many people did it, they just give you a space to add it. But med schools don't add more value to you if you have a minor. Only just the additional knowledge that you gained from a minor. You could have gained that same knowledge, but just by taking a bunch of random classes, and they'll see it on your transcript. Any questions about anything I said so far? All right, moving right along. I don't know how we're doing on time. Doug, am I doing it? What time is it?
It is 10:20, so you have about 5 to 10 minutes more.
Okay. All right, so this was just kind of a summary of what I had just said. Again, the word exactly is all capitalized for a reason. You are literally copying your transcript into the application. There is zero critical thinking in this process. And this is so confusing to people for some reason, but you don't have to think about why it says what it says. All you have to do is type it exactly as it appears. And as long as you do that, if you type it exactly as it appears, oh, well, let's say hypothetically you took a seminar and it says directed group study, but the name of your seminar was something so cool. What do you put on your transcript? This is quiz time. What do you put on the transcript? You put directed group study. Even though on the name of your syllabus, it was a really cool name, you have to copy exactly as it appears on your transcript. Good job, Jason and Madeline. I'm really proud of you. Okay, so that's, yeah, I'll probably say that about 500,000 more times before June. That's okay. But that's how that works. I'm being really sarcastic today. I'm getting a little salty today, if you can't tell. Let's see here. Any other questions?
Hi, Joanne. I do have a question.
Yep.
So when we're doing I actually have a lot of seminars. So I'll be putting down directed group study. Would it look a little odd if I have tons of pass fails?
Nope. That's pretty
Okay.
common for seminars.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And in the world of COVID, there's gonna be so many pass fails on transcripts these days. All the things they used to think about pass fails are probably gonna become obsolete.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to show you what the activities section looks like on Amcas, so you can kind of see what kind of information you're going to be collecting for each experience. And you can see on the left how it has multiple date ranges. So if you did the same experience in different time frames, like let's say you did it one summer, every summer for 4 years, you can break out those date ranges by summer or by dates. And then this is what it looks like in ACOMAS. I think ACOMAS looks a lot cleaner. I personally like ACOMAS as an application better. You can see it asks you if you were paid, if you received credit, or as a volunteer. And with the received credit part, this is a little tricky because I know for most of you, you got credit for doing things like doing research or doing student run clinics or other things. And so you just put yes. I mean, I think that just be honest. And I don't think, like I said, we have a pretty good acceptance rate when it comes to DO. So and I'm pretty sure everyone's been honest. So I don't think it's kept them out of med school or anything. You would put, for Amcas, you could predict a future date. You can actually, if you know you're going to be doing an activity all the way through the end, like all the way through your gap year, you can put like July 1 of the following year and just put future dates. In ACOMAS, you cannot put future dates. So you could put up to the current date, or you could, yeah, I'm pretty sure you can't put future dates in ACOMAS. So I think you would, or it says right here, current experience. So you can put yes on that. Does that answer your question, Sarika? All right. So we already talked a lot about personal statements, but I just want to tell you this. If you copy and paste your personal statement from a Word document into Amcas, when they open up your application on the other end on Amcas, they're going to see a bunch of funky characters in there. You want to copy your personal statement out of a Word doc or a Google Doc and put it into a text file, and then copy it from the text file into Amcas. If you read the 60-page Amcas handbook, it tells you to do this. But for some reason, I find that nobody reads that 60-page document. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I worked at the med school a long time ago, this happened all the time. Like most of the applications, the personal statements were full of these weird characters. And my boss, who was a neuroradiologist, she got so mad, and she would tell me, she would like get mad at me and say like, Joanne, figure out how to fix this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I can't. It's not anything that we can control. It's the applicants who are not following the directions. So at that point, I didn't understand what the problem was. I just called Amcas and they told me like, we can't help it. That's just how it's coming through. And the reason why it is your text has HTML built into it when you're writing it in those other formats. So the text file will take out the HTML, and you want it to be like that. I have not heard of ACOMAS having this problem, but Amcas is a tiny bit more archaic than ACOMAS. So if you do not want to annoy the people on the other end, then please do this and you will stand out, I promise. This is what the letter request page looks like. A couple important things about this are you can add up to 10 letters, but you do not have to send letters to all, you don't have to send all 10 letters to every school. So it'd be very strategic of you to, if you have 10 letters or 6 letters or whatever, to pick different letters to go to different schools. Don't just blanket send all of your letters to every single school. And the reason why that could be strategic is like, let's say there happens to be one mediocre letter in there. And let's just say someone screening your app was looking for any reason to not invite you because they've been told they got to, tighten their screen a little bit. And they just so happen to open up that one mediocre letter first, and they're reading it and they're like, ugh, this person is really mediocre. Boom, you're done, right? So if you're not, you don't know if your letters are mediocre, so you don't want to send all the letters to every single school. Mix it up a little bit. And if you know that there's like a superstar letter in there, the person, is going to do a really good job at it, then clearly like use that one to the schools, most of the schools, all the schools if you want. But if you have a person you're not 100% sure, you just use them because you needed that type of letter for a certain school that required it, then don't send it to everybody else. You don't need to do that. Any questions about that? For ACOMAS, you can only have 4 letters, and they do all go to every school. So that's the difference between the two apps. And they have this cool little letter request form right here. So if you're not using a COMIS, once you add in your letter writers, you can generate this letter request form in an Amcas, which is a PDF, and you email it as an attachment to your letter writers and say, here's the link to upload my letter. Thank you for saying yes. So as soon as you open up your Amcas, if you have your people who said yes already, you can go ahead and add them in first thing. That way you can get that letter request form. All right, I'm running out of time and I'm afraid Doug's gonna hop on here any minute and tell me, get off, you must end. Talked about letters before anyway, so let me see. This is what your school list looks like. Wait, no, this is still, I don't even know what I'm looking at right now. Let's keep going. So school list we talked about last time or a couple times ago. And here are some resources for your help with the application. Amcats is really good. You can literally, well, let me back up. Sometimes they're helpful. You can call their phone number. They weren't really good last year. They had a lot of problems last year, but that's, I think, because of COVID, obviously. Normally in normal years, they're very good at helping. And so you can call that number. And if you have any quick questions about specific things in your app, it's really good to communicate with them sooner than later. Amcas is not the med school, so you can bother these people all you want. You're paying them a lot of money to apply. They work for you. So if you have problems with your app, call them. Don't hesitate to call them. They're not going to tell the med schools that you called them 50 times and, got cranky. Once you get your application verified and the med schools have your app, definitely do not call the med schools cranky and call them 50 times. Please call me before you call the med schools. That would be very bad. But they are there for you to help.
I will emphasize on that, by the way, the Twitter, get on the AMC Twitter, Amcas Twitter feed. I know many of you may not like Twitter, but that is where pretty much all of their official announcements go out. So if there's any changes to the app or changes in the system or the system goes down or whatever it is, it will be announced there first. So it's pretty much a good idea to get on that Twitter feed.
Yep, that's really good advice. Madeline, you have a quick question, it looks like. Research units on your transcript. Yeah, so as you're going down your list of classes, you're going to copy it. You're going to copy every single class on your transcript. And how are you going to copy it? Exactly as it appears. So if it says like, I don't know what the name of your clinic would be, like I think some of it might be like FAP or something like that. You're just going to copy it and then it's okay. I mean, they're probably all pass, no pass 2 units. If you leave it out, then it would flag it as an error and they'll make you go back and put them back in. Okay, well, it's been an absolute pleasure telling you all the things that I know about Amcas and ACOMAS. I feel like even though I talked for 1.5 hours straight, I probably could continue talking for another 1.5 hours straight and tell you more things, but alas, my throat is really dry and I have to stop talking. And you get to learn about the MCAT now, which is really fun. So we're at drop-ins every Monday through Thursday. And if you want to chat more with any of us, feel free to come by then. And you're very welcome, everyone. It's always a pleasure hanging out with you on a Saturday. Thanks for putting up with my salty attitude. It's always a little bit more fun if I can be like that. I don't know. So Doug, I'm going to hand it back to you and everyone have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Joanne, for all that wonderful information about Amcas and ACOMAS. So what we'll do now is we're going to take a short 10-minute break and then we'll regroup and come back and talk about some Psych and Soc. We'll have a little Psych Soc mini lesson here with Taylor Pratt, who is our representative from the Princeton Review today. So go ahead and take a break. We'll come back at 10:40 on the dot and we'll get started again. So I will give you guys a short announcement into the break. So we'll see you in just a bit. All righty. So come on back. If you're not back, get back here anyways. And we're going to get started with some Psych Soc mini lesson from the Princeton Review. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Pratt here, and he's going to take us through this lesson. So take it away.
Thank you very much. My name is Taylor Pratt. I am a psychology and sociology instructor with the Princeton Review. I've actually taught much more than that over the past about 8 years I've been with the company. I taught some ACT, SAT, MCAT, LSAT, GMAT, GRE, but this is the psychology and sociology section is my specialty. It's my absolute favorite section on any test that I teach. It's got some really interesting topics as well as some challenges. So for about the first 5 minutes, I'm just going to give a really broad overview of the section for those of you who might not be perfectly familiar with the MCAT. And then for the next 85 minutes, I'm just going to give you as many strategies and techniques and pieces of content that will be really helpful to you for that section. So I did want to have my camera on just for the brief introduction, but I'm actually going to turn my camera off during the content portion. One of the things we teach in our class is regarding attention. Essentially, when you're trying to focus on two different things, that's called divided attention. It's much less efficient than focusing on one thing. That's called selective attention. What I tell my students, my face won't help you learn MCAT material. So I want the focus to be on the slideshow and then the chat box as well. So if you do not have the chat box pulled up, definitely pull that up. I'll be asking you questions. We'll be kind of engaging in a conversation via the chat box, and feel free to ask me questions there as well. We'll use that. I always make sure to teach interactively, and that's something that the Princeton Review really emphasizes overall. So I'm going to turn my video off, keep my voice on, and I'll do a brief overview of the section, and then we'll learn content. So the psychology and sociology section is a recently added section of the MCAT. They added it just a couple of years back, and it contains 59 questions, giving you 95 minutes to complete it. If you do the math, that comes out to about 1.5 minutes per question. So one of the ways to improve on this section, and really all sections of the MCAT, you need to practice getting questions not only correct, but making sure you're answering questions efficiently and using your time in a really efficient manner. That's something that I'll teach a little bit of today, and we do emphasize in our course as well. One challenge of the section, it is the last section. It's the fourth and final section of the test that absolutely presents an added challenge. The MCAT is long. On test day, you'll spend just over 7.5 hours of seated time. Now that does include a lunch break in the middle of it, but it's a long, long test. So one of the ways to make sure that you're prepared for that experience is to take full-length practice tests in advance of test day. And when you practice, don't pause your practice tests and go get up and get a snack and get a drink. Don't pause it and come back another day when you're feeling better. You can't do that on your official MCAT test. So you need to practice in a similar way. It's absolutely a challenge to have to sit there and take a long 7.5 hour test. The analogy I give, it's like running a marathon. You're going to be tired the first time you do that, and really every time you do it. But the more you take those 7.5 hour practice tests, the more used to it you'll be, and the more effective you will remain while fatigued. Now, regarding the psych-soc section specifically, I have a saying. This section is an ocean wide and a foot deep. Now, here's what I mean by that. The amount of topics that the writers could test you on is very, very vast. Each psych-soc section, each administration contains 59 questions. You're likely to get 59 questions on 59 different topics. That's one of the challenges. I want to give kind of a preview. In our program, we have a cheat sheet at the end of every Psych Soc class, going over the important vocabulary terms you need to know from the day's concepts. This is the cheat sheet from one of the 7 class sessions for Psych Soc. So this is about maybe a 7th, maybe a little less than a 7th of the vocab that you need to be familiar with. It is a very vocabulary heavy section. That's one of the challenges. However, one of the great advantages of this section, the AAMC, the test writers who write the MCAT, they do not expect you to have an advanced psychology degree before you sit for the test. They understand that this probably isn't your major, that you might not have taken many or possibly any psychology classes in college. So they test basic, fundamental Psych 101 and Soc 101 concepts. So while you have to be familiar with many different vocab terms, you don't really have to be an expert on any particular psychology or sociology content. And that's one of the great advantages. As long as you learn the vocab, learn the basic concepts, and learn how to apply them to a basic question stem scenario, you're going to be in good shape to answer both freestanding questions and passage-based questions on the MCAT, on this section specifically. So I want to go ahead and just launch into covering as many of those vocab terms as I can fit in this about 85 minutes that we have left. And I want to start with one of the most frequently asked about concepts, operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a theory in the field of learning within psychology and sociology that was created by B.F. Skinner. That's one of the important names you'll need to know. He was a founder of the behaviorist perspective that I want to give kind of a 2-word summary of operant conditioning within the behaviorist perspective. This is the idea that when a human or animal engages in a behavior and they get a good result, a pleasant outcome, they will be more likely to engage in that behavior in the future because they want that pleasant outcome again. However, let's say a human or animal engages in a behavior, they take an action, and they get a bad result. There's an unpleasant outcome. Well, they're not going to do that as much, or maybe they'll try to avoid it completely in the future because they do not want to take the action that results in a bad outcome. That's kind of a 2-sentence summary of operant conditioning. Now, there's a bunch of vocabulary and technical terminology you need to know within that framework. So I actually want to really emphasize a couple of vocab terms you need to know and how the MCAT writers expect you to use them. First of all, reinforcement. I have a little mnemonic for it, is always a reward. Reinforcement is a reward. You can remember that. They both start with R-E. I don't have a mnemonic for punishment, but you can just use the normal English definition of punishment. It's not pleasant. You don't want it to happen to you. I also have a couple more vocabulary terminology elements that I want to emphasize. On the psychology and sociology section, positive does not necessarily mean happy or good. Oftentimes in everyday English, people use the word positive to mean something happy. But on the Psych Soc section, you want to think mathematically. positive does not necessarily mean happy or good. It means you are adding something. You are adding a stimulus. Similarly, negative doesn't necessarily mean bad or sad. It means you're subtracting something. So by using the mathematical terms for positive and negative, that can help you remember the vocabulary and apply it correctly. So I'm going to ask the first of many brainstorms now, using this vocabulary. What are some examples we can think of positive reinforcement, where we are adding a stimulus and the person engaging in the behavior finds it rewarding? Go ahead and use the chat box right now. There are tons of answers we can think of. What are some examples of positive reinforcement? Absolutely. We could give candy as a reward for doing a show, or food. Yep, very good. Keep them coming. I'll try to get as many responses on the board as we can fit. Yep, money, absolutely. Candy, food, money, treats, absolutely. It works for animals as well as too. Verbal praise, very good. The stimulus does not have to be a physical object. It could be words that make you feel happy or good. Very nice. Now, positive punishment. Let's use the vocabulary we learned. Positive means we're adding a stimulus. Punishment means it dissuades the human or animal from engaging in that behavior again. What are some examples of positive punishment that we can think of? Yes, an electric shock. Absolutely. What else? Let's come up with a couple more examples of positive punishment. We can see that electric shock fits. We are adding a stimulus and it's punishing overall. Yes, verbal judgment. So verbal judgment or scolding. We are adding a stimulus to that person's experience, and it's not pleasant. It's a punishment. Now, negative reinforcement. I want to talk about this because thousands of students will go out there and take the MCAT and get this wrong, but you will not because you've learned the vocabulary and how to apply it. So let me ask you this. If I just say the words negative reinforcement, does it sound like a happy thing or sound like a dangerous, sad thing? What does it sound like when I just say the words? Negative reinforcement. Does it sound happy or sad? Exactly. It sounds like a bad thing. If you go up to someone on the street and say, would you like to be negatively reinforced? That person will likely say no. Yeah, absolutely. What Sari said, and I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. I always will pronounce names correctly if I'm saying it somehow in not the right way. So I believe it's sorry. Feel free to correct me in the chat box. I really like this answer. Negative reinforcement kind of has a negative connotation. But you need to go with what you have learned about the vocab and use that to guide your answers on the Psych Soc section, as opposed to just what words sound like. So thinking of it step by step, for negative reinforcement, we are subtracting a stimulus. We're taking away some sort of stimulus from that person or animal's experience, and it is rewarding. It's a good, happy thing overall. So in this case, we would remove something that's unpleasant to actually increase the likelihood that the human or animal engages in a certain behavior more often in the future. Let's think of some examples of negative reinforcement. What are some negative reinforcements we can play? Yeah, getting rid of a scary object. Let's say removing a scary object. If there's a bug in the house and someone gets rid of it, well, that's negative reinforcement. We're removing the scary bug so everyone can go back to feeling at ease. Yeah, So I really like this answer from Megan. Not having to eat vegetables. That could be negative reinforcement for engaging in good behavior. Let's say the child learns, you're trying to teach the child to say please and thank you. The child says, please, can I not eat my vegetables today? You would provide the negative reinforcement of saying, sure, you don't have to eat your carrots or broccoli or whatever. Yes, very good. Removing a dog's leash. You let the dog off the leash, let the dog run around wherever he or she wants. What I like about these answers, they fit the definition of negative. We are removing a stimulus and it's rewarding overall. Many students mess that up because they just go with kind of how the vocabulary sounds. It sounds unpleasant, but it's actually really nice. Now, negative punishment. Filling in, kind of continuing the pattern, we're removing a stimulus, and it's an unpleasant thing overall to be negatively punished. Let's come up with some examples of negative punishment. What are some real world situations? Yes, very good. I'm going to put these answers on the board. Taking away candy that a child would otherwise like. Yes, losing phone privileges. A timeout is a great example of an often used form of negative punishment. When a kid misbehaves, you take away their ability to go where they want. They have to sit in timeout, or taking away toys. Very good. So this is an example of how knowing vocabulary allows you to correctly categorize certain types of conditioning. I want to go ahead and very briefly touch on some of the biological elements of operant conditioning. Now, on the psychology and sociology section, there can be some neurobiology topics. However, it's a very small part of the section. You are likely to get maybe one, maybe two questions on neurobiology elements, and they will ask basic biology questions as opposed to advanced neurobiology concepts. So for example, I want to briefly talk about the dopamine reward pathway. Essentially, this is an area within the nucleus accumbens that when a human or animal, or sorry, when a human engages in pleasurable activities, dopamine is released there. It serves as a pleasurable, positive experience. That's really all you need to know about the nucleus accumbens. When it comes to the brain and pleasurable things, dopamine is released within that structure, and that's what leads to the good, happy feeling when you engage in pleasurable behaviors. This can be involved in addictive drugs. So if someone develops an addiction to a substance, very often it's because that substance promotes the release of dopamine within the nucleus accumbens, which serves as reinforcement to continue engaging with that drug. All right, and that's really it. You don't need to have an advanced degree and understand all the really elaborate mechanisms behind that for the psychology and sociology section. Now, I do want to classify primary and secondary reinforcers. More vocab that you need to know. A primary reinforcer is one that is related to an innate biological need. Similarly, a primary punisher is related to an innate biological need. And people enjoy primary reinforcers and dislike primary punishers innately without the need for any previous learning. Secondary reinforcers and punishers require previous learning. There has to be some sort of past learning or past experience in order for people to enjoy secondary reinforcers or dislike secondary punishers. Let's do a couple of quick brainstorms. What is an example of a primary reinforcement that we can think of that's related to an innate biological need? Absolutely. Food is a great general answer. Food, specific types of food such as pizza would fit in here, drinks, etc. So anything related to food or drink or sleep, yeah, feeling full, that would be a good example. Feeling full, yeah, heat, I like this answer. Feeling warm, that's related to an innate biological need to be at the right temperature. Yeah, feeling safe, that fits under Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow is an important psychological theorist to know. He created a hierarchy of needs, and safety needs are on that hierarchy. So that would be applicable. Now, primary punishment, I'll go ahead and just mention essentially any sort of physical punishment that is painful would fit here, as would if someone is hungry or thirsty, that would fit as well. Hunger, thirst, etc. Now, let's come up with some examples of secondary reinforcement that's not related to a biological need, but people learn to enjoy. What are examples of secondary reinforcement that exist in our modern society? Absolutely. Laura just gave a really prevalent, widespread, classic example of a secondary reinforcement. The phrase goes, "You can't eat money." It does not satisfy an innate biological need. But people learn that it can be exchanged for things that you do like. Regarding alcohol, I would classify that more so in the primary reinforcement category. It's related to your innate biological need for drinks. There are certain biological mechanisms. Alcohol acts as a depressant. So because that's more of a biological element, that would more so go in the primary reinforcement. Trophies, great example. Trophies. Or even to classify some responses this class gave a moment ago, verbal praise would go under secondary reinforcement. It makes you feel good, not from a biological standpoint, but more from an emotional standpoint. All right, and then secondary punishment would be something that is not related to biological need. People learn it's a bad thing. What are some examples of secondary punishment that we can brainstorm? Yes, social ostracizing. As opposed to being a biological punishment, that's a social, environmental punishment. What's one related to academics? There were a couple that we need to disclose on our applications connected to the first half of today's, bad grades. As we mentioned earlier on, any sort of academic probation or academic violation, that would be an example of secondary punishment. Tickets, absolutely. Let me actually use the example of tickets, and I want to give kind of a bonus brainstorm here. Let's say you park illegally, you're given a ticket, and you're going to lose money. Would a ticket be an example of positive or negative secondary punishment? How would we classify that? We've got a couple votes for positive. Let me ask this kind of in more detail. Does a ticket mean you gain or lose money? What's the ultimate purpose of a ticket? Exactly, you lose money. So let's kind of fit that, fitting into our framework of positive versus negative. The focus is on taking away the money. So that actually means it would more closely fit under the negative secondary punishment classification. And the MCAT writers would phrase it in a specific way. They would basically, a classic example of a question stem they might ask, they would say the loss of money from a ticket is most closely, and because they focus on the word loss of money, we could classify it as negative secondary punishment. All right, very good. So what I want to do, I want to go over reinforcement schedules. And in order to do so, I want to actually focus on some of the origins of the field, some of the main early experiments, and then explain the findings of B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist psychologist. So B.F. Skinner invented a device called an operant conditioning chamber. Informally, you might have heard of the phrase Skinner box. That's the informal name for an operant conditioning chamber. It's a little box that looks like this that Skinner and his research team, they put mice in these operant conditioning chambers, and then they programmed those chambers to do all sorts of interesting things. Basically, they would program the box to essentially deliver food pellets when the rats pressed a little lever on the side of the box. So you might be wondering, how does anyone get a rat to pull a lever in the first place? That's a behavior that rats don't tend to do naturally. The answer is a process called shaping. It involves rewarding closer and closer and closer behaviors to the actual desired behavior. So for example, what Skinner could do, Skinner could put a food pellet on the correct half of the box that's on the side with the lever. Then Skinner and his team could put a food pellet right under the lever and reinforce the rat for being really close by. Then they could give the rat a food pellet for touching the lever. And then finally for pulling the lever. So by reinforcing closer and closer behaviors to what the research team is actually looking for, they can shape or kind of reinforce the rat toward that behavior. So that's how they trained rats to pull levers in the first place. Then they ran all sorts of experiments in the field of operant conditioning. Once the experiment formally began, the rat would only be reinforced for pressing the lever, not for doing any of those close behaviors. So that's the Skinner box. And throughout Skinner's experiments, he focused on observable behavior. So Skinner would set up the box with a specific schedule of reinforcements and observe how many times did the rat press the lever? When did the rat tend to press the lever? That's actually one of the major strengths of the field of behaviorism. Certain fields of psychology, such as the psychoanalytic field founded by Freud, can sometimes focus on internal mental concepts that are really difficult to prove or test empirically. The behaviorist perspective focuses on observable, measurable behavior. That's a major strength of this particular field, subfield within psychology. All right, so I want to talk about a couple of reinforcement schedules and the results that Skinner and his team found when they reinforced the rats in different ways. First, there is a type of reinforcement schedule called continuous reinforcement. This is when reinforcement is provided after every single response, meaning the rat in the box pulls the lever, it gets a food pellet. And that happens every single time the rat pulls the lever. That's continuous reinforcement. The response rate is actually slow because the rats learned fairly quickly they can get food whenever they want just by pulling a lever. So there's no need to pull the lever over and over and over again. They would only pull it when it's hungry. And the extinction rate would be fast, meaning once the reinforcement schedule stops, the rats are very quickly going to stop exhibiting the behavior. The very first time a rat pulls the lever and does not get a food pellet, that's a pretty good indication that something has changed. And that behavior would go extinct fairly quickly. It's the best way to teach new behavior, but has the slowest rate of extinction. Now, a different type of schedule that Skinner and his team did for different rats in a different experiment, Skinner implemented a fixed ratio reinforcement schedule, meaning they programmed the box to give each rat a reinforcer after a specific number of responses. So for example, a 10-to-1 fixed ratio reinforcement schedule means every 10th time the rat presses the lever, it gets one food pellet. And then the rat would press the lever 9 more times, get no reinforcement, and then on the 10th time, a food pellet would drop into the chamber. This has a much faster response rate. The rat's going to press the lever a higher number of overall times. And then it has a slower extinction rate. Let me ask you all this. What is an example of a fixed ratio reinforcement schedule in real life? Let's see if we can think of a parallel to real life. What's an example of a fixed ratio reinforcement schedule potentially related to fast food or fast casual? Pay for hours worked. If you work hourly, absolutely. If you work a set number of hours and then get a set paycheck based on that, if you're kind of on wage, that's a fixed ratio schedule. If you are on a salary, that's actually a different type of schedule that I will talk about in just a moment. So it depends on the pay or reinforcement structure. What's an example related to foods or corporations that you might enjoy? I know many of you as students probably have certain certain reward or reinforcement fixed ratio schedules? Yes, a stamp card. How many of you have a Chipotle rewards card? That tends to be, just type in the chat if you have a Chipotle rewards card and you fill it out on a regular basis. But that's exactly what we are talking about here. I think they give you every 7 or every 8 burritos you buy, you get one for free. That's a classic real life example of a fixed ratio reinforcement schedule. There's no variance, there's no variability. Every 7 times you pay for a burrito, you get one for free. The next time you'll need to buy 7 more burritos to get another one for free. That is different from a variable ratio schedule, which involves randomness or variance. So let me use an example of the rat in the Skinner box. Skinner and his team could program the boxes to kind of randomly dispense food pellets for the rats after a random number of lever presses. So for example, the rat might get a food pellet after 15 presses, but then the next time it only takes 4 lever presses. So only 4 presses required. And then the next time it takes 38. It would be variable how many times the behavior needs to happen in order to get the reinforcement. This has a very fast response rate and a long drawn out extinction rate. They found that even after the experiment stopped and the lever didn't do anything, the rats continued to press that lever for a long, long time afterwards in the hopes of getting a food pellet. So that's what it means by slow extinction rate. Let me ask you this. What is a real world example or parallel that uses a variable ratio reinforcement schedule? What can we think of in real life that uses this kind of schedule? Okay, let me take this answer and expand it and keep answers coming while I talk about this example. If your parents reward you kind of erratically or not on a regular basis for good grades, that would be variable ratio. However, if there's some sort of set payout structure where every single time you get an A, you get $5 or whatever, that would be fixed ratio. So it depends on how the parents implement it. I want to talk about Megan's response, gambling. That's a very classic real world example of a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. Imagine the people who sit at that slot machine and they keep pulling the lever over and over and over, despite not getting any meaningful reinforcement. So that's kind of a real world example you can use to help remember this vocabulary term. Variable ratio schedule is akin to gambling, and it has the slowest rate of extinction. That's how you can remember it. All right, a fixed interval reinforcement schedule involves giving a reinforcement after a certain amount of time as opposed to a certain amount of behaviors. So let's use the example of the rat in the Skinner box. A team of researchers might program the box to check after 10 minutes and see, has that rat pulled the lever at least once? If it has, a food pellet falls at the end of the 10-minute interval. If not, no food pellet falls. So the reinforcement is given after a set amount of time as long as the behavior occurs. I want to call back to an answer from earlier, talking about wages. If you are on a salary payment method, that fits fixed interval. You go in, you do work, and you get a paycheck every 2 weeks. as long as you showed up to work. It doesn't really matter how hard you worked, how long you were, if you stayed extra hours. On a salary schedule, that's fixed interval. Every 2 weeks, that paycheck either arrives in the mail, or what's more likely for the modern era, just gets direct deposited in. All right, and then a variable interval schedule is very similar, except for the reinforcement is given after random times. The time period is not the same in all instances. So maybe behaviorist, psychologist, researchers set up a box for the rats and program it so that one interval is 20 minutes and it gives a pellet if the rat pulled the lever. The next interval maybe would only be 2 minutes, and then 40 minutes. It would be a random interval each time. And as long as the behavior is exhibited at least once, the food pellet drops at the end of that time. Kind of a real world example would be fishing. Just, you don't know when the next fish is going to bite. It's all variable when you get the next bite on the line. So one vocab term that the MCAT uses, we have seen them ask in a couple of questions about partial reinforcement schedules. That just refers to anything that is not continuous. So any of these four, which I just talked about, those would be partial reinforcement schedules, because the person does not get a reward, aka reinforcement, every single time they do the behavior, just some of the time. All right. So I do want to go over a couple of other vocab terms. Like I said, this section is very vocab heavy. There is a vocab term that applies specifically to animals called biological predispositions. So this is a concept that is just a lot easier to operantly condition an animal to do a behavior that's similar to what they instinctually tend to do on a regular basis. For example, let's imagine that Skinner and his team wanted to expand their research into other animals. If they just made boxes, operant conditioning chambers that could be programmed and put birds in them, birds would not really tend to pull levers all that often, because birds don't really tend to pull things. It's within the bird's instincts to peck instead of pull. So it would be much better, much easier to condition these birds to, say, peck a button as opposed to pull a lever, because that's much more in line with what birds instinctually want to do anyway. That's a vocab term known as biological predispositions. The MCAT writers could leave that vocab term in one of your answer choices, and you would have to determine, is it relevant to the scenario that's presented or not. And then instinctive drift is another vocab term. This is the tendency for animals' instincts to actually get in the way and prevent a behavior from being conditioned because it goes against that animal's instincts. So I want to give an example, a little story of instinctive drift. There were some folks who successfully taught a raccoon to deposit wooden coins into a metal container for food reinforcement. It was kind of these were animal trainers. They were trying to teach their raccoon to do a little trick. They would have the raccoon pick up the coin, drop the coin in the container, and then they would give that raccoon a little treat, some primary positive reinforcement. However, soon they ran into issues. The raccoon started rubbing the coins together and then dipping them, not dropping them, into the container. What they found was that raccoon was performing the motor program that raccoons use to wash food in a stream. That's just instincts that raccoons have to take kind of objects they hold in their hands and dip them into a stream and perform the motor motion that would be necessary. So they found that this instinct to dip instead of drop the coins actually interfered with the trick to such an extent the trainers had to give up on the trick. The raccoon was not able to learn it correctly. That's instinctive drift. The intrusion of a species typical behavior actually prevented that organism from completing the task. So I have a little fun epilogue. Instead, the animal trainers gave up on that trick and they trained the raccoon to play basketball. They gave the raccoon a bigger ball and they found the raccoon's instincts did not kick in to wash a bigger object. So that raccoon was able to complete the basketball version of the trick without the interference of instinctive drift. I've seen instinctive drift tested in freestanding questions before. All right, so one big element that will help improve your MCAT score is practicing. I've given a bunch of vocab terms. Now we need to use them and practice them by answering questions that are similar to what the MCAT asks. I have kind of a series of practice questions, and we're going to go through them as a class. So AV is trying to quit smoking. If she goes 7 days without smoking, she'll treat herself to a movie of her choice. If she does smoke, she makes herself do an hour of exercise at the gym. How would these be best described in terms of operant conditioning? So let's break down this scenario step by step. Going 7 days without smoking, treating herself to a movie of her choice. Is this reinforcement or punishment? Go ahead and answer via the chat box. Yes, Courtney and others are correct. This is reinforcement. Is it positive or negative reinforcement? Ask yourself, are we adding or removing a stimulus? Yep, positive reinforcement. We are adding the stimulus of the movie. Now, would it be primary or secondary reinforcement? Exactly, we have secondary reinforcement. Watching a movie is not related to an innate biological need. Which answer choice can we eliminate? We can definitely eliminate an answer choice here. Exactly. To be honest, a huge part of the MCAT is process of elimination and identifying the wrong answers using your knowledge of the vocabulary to determine that that answer is wrong. One principle that we give, it's often easier to find the 3 wrong answers than it is to find the correct answer. And one other, so whenever you find a wrong answer, just eliminate that choice immediately. One side benefit, now we don't even have to worry about what the second half of B says. We are absolutely confident that B is not the right choice here. So we cross it off just based on the first half of B. We don't even really need to worry about the second half of B. It could be right, it could be wrong. Don't spend your valuable time evaluating a choice that you're definitely not going to pick anyway. Now, if you weren't 100% sure, let's say you're unsure of whether we should keep or eliminate B, then you would absolutely engage with the second half of that choice. But hey, don't spend time evaluating options that you've already eliminated. Your time on the MCAT is valuable. Move through the test efficiently. Process of elimination is a great way to help with that. So let's evaluate this part, the smoking part. When she smokes, she makes herself do an hour of exercise at the gym. First of all, is this reinforcement or punishment? Is she reinforcing herself or punishing herself? Yes, she is using this as a punishment, an unpleasant result. So can we eliminate any of our remaining choices based on that application of the vocabulary? Can we eliminate anything? Absolutely. Choice A is gone. Thousands of MCAT takers will miss questions like this because they don't know the vocabulary and how to apply it. But fortunately, you will not. Reinforcement is always pleasurable. That's not what's happening in the second half of this question stem scenario. All right, would we call this positive or negative punishment, doing the hour at the gym? How would we classify that? Exactly, positive punishment, because we are adding a stimulus of having to do that exercise. So what is our answer choice that remains? What's going to be the correct response? Yep, we eliminate choice C, and D is in fact the one that we keep. This is a really basic example of how you would approach a psychology and sociology question. You can see that it involves knowing your vocab so that you can determine whether each answer option applies or contradicts the scenario. Use process of elimination, use your time efficiently, and find the answer which was consistent with the question as opposed to inconsistent. I want to go ahead and do just a couple more examples because this is a type of question that the writers love asking. I'm not going to have you all do a passage, but I did want to at least show one because engaging with passages is an important part. Essentially, instead of making you read all of this on a small screen, I want to talk about the best approach to a passage. You would read the passage quickly. And here's what I mean by that. Whenever you get presented with a psychology and sociology passage, you want to read for the main idea. There are tons of small details and nuances that you could be asked about, but to be honest, there are many, many facts and portions of each of these sentences in these paragraphs that just won't end up being relevant to any of the questions they ask you. So when you're reading a passage the first time, you want to read for the overall main idea. You should also use your noteboard to write the big, broad main idea so that you have kind of a table of contents to refer to. We call this your passage map. These passage main ideas should not be big, bold, beautiful, elaborate, complete sentences. One-word main ideas are fine. Maybe 3 or 4 words is plenty. So whenever you see an MCAT passage, you would write down, you would read quickly. The goal is to finish reading the passage in about 2 to 2.5 minutes. It's okay if you don't understand everything about every detail of every sentence within the passage. The MCAT takes a different set of skills than your academic classes. Let me ask you this. Let's say you're reading a college textbook for one of your med school prereqs, and you come to a paragraph that you really don't understand. Are you going to reread? So you're at home reading for homework. You're reading your college textbook. You get a paragraph you don't understand. Are you going to reread it or just move on without understanding it? What will you do in that case? You're going to reread it or just move on? Absolutely. That would tend to be pretty much everyone's instinct. So one shift in approach that will really help you on the psych-soc section, if you are reading the passage the first time, so you've come to this passage, you're reading it, you have not looked at any questions yet. If you find a sentence or paragraph or clump of sentences that you don't understand, a really, really important thing, fight your instinct to reread it. Just keep going. And here's the difference. When you're at home, you have all the time you need to reread that paragraph as many times as you want. That's a good life skill to reread things until you get them. However, the MCAT is a time limited test. You only get 95 minutes for this section. You don't get to spend extra time. So fight the urge to reread stuff you don't understand on your first pass through the passage. That's fine. You probably won't get asked about that particular detail, that particular sentence. So when you're reading passages, read for the main idea. And if you don't understand something, that's great. Now, when you go to a question, that's when you'll go to the you'll read the question, you'll understand the question task and determine what part of the passage talked about it. That's when you go reread in more detail and reread a couple of times, potentially, until you really understand it. So I wanted to at least talk about that overall approach. This approach takes practice. That's why doing practice passages, evaluating your performance, it's an important element of improving your score on this section or any other section. So I won't kind of make you do this passage right now, but I did want to at least talk about the broad ways to approach passage-based questions on this section of the MCAT. I do have a couple of questions that are considered memory questions. Here's why. The MCAT writers will do this. They'll give you a passage. They'll give you a bunch of paragraphs, a bunch of information, and then they'll ask questions that literally don't refer to the passage in any way. You might wonder why the writers do this. Good question. Don't worry about it. You don't control what types of questions the MCAT writers give you. You just have to answer them. So you can think it's a great test structure or a poor test structure, but I'm just telling you, a shocking number of questions that are attached with passages on this Psych-Soc section don't actually use the passage in a meaningful way. So I want to show an example of that, and we'll be able to do this one pretty quickly just based on the vocabulary that we learned today. So following the study, the school administrators sent a letter home encouraging parents to use operant conditioning. The letter encouraged negative reinforcement, and it asks which of the following methods could work. So let's evaluate, and I actually have a tip. You don't have to start with numeral 1. In fact, it's often better to start with the easiest, shortest numeral. So let's just start with numeral 3. Ground the student for every bad grade. First, would we consider this reinforcement or punishment? Is this reinforcement or punishment? Absolutely, this is punishment. So is this numeral going to be correct? No, it does not fulfill the question task. So by knowing our vocab, we were able to very quickly and efficiently get rid of numeral 3. That means we can cross off D. It is not going to be the answer. let's go ahead and do the next shortest numeral. Relax curfew rules if the student is up to date on all homework assignments. First of all, is this reinforcement or punishment? Yep, reinforcement. It's a happy, pleasant thing for the kid. Next, are we adding or subtracting the curfew rules? Exactly. So would we consider this negative reinforcement? Would we say that numeral 2 is accurate? Very good. So when you determine that a numeral is accurate on a Roman numeral question, go ahead and highlight it. Just as a visual reminder, so that you end up keeping yourself organized and picking the accurate numeral based on the work you've done. So we will cross off choice A because it does not include the numeral 2. All right, last one to evaluate. Pay the student a small amount for every homework assignment completed. Is this reinforcement or punishment? Reinforcement, is it positive or negative? Positive. So we cross off numeral 1 because the question is asking for negative reinforcement. And that leads us to answer choice B, 2 only. If you know your vocab, you can evaluate these numerals fairly quickly. Just apply the vocab to the scenario and use process of elimination. I want to give another example of another question associated with this passage that doesn't really require the text. It just requires outside knowledge. So let's say administrators wanted to use reinforcement instead of punishment. Which reinforcement schedule would produce the longest lasting change? So if we think back to what we just learned about the reinforcement schedules, this question is asking for the longest lasting change, aka the longest extinction phase. We're looking for a schedule where behavior persists for a long time after the reinforcement schedule has stopped. So this is just pure outside knowledge that you need to know. Which of these schedules that we talked about has the longest extinction period, aka longest lasting change? It was analogous to gambling, is the way you can remember that. Yep, it's D. It's the variable ratio schedule. This is an example of one where you just need to know your vocab. Pure outside knowledge, you cannot find that information in the passage. For certain questions, you will be able to find the information in the passage. We're not going to read the whole passage. I'm just going to show you an example of how you might approach one passage on a passage-based question. So this question number 3, it talks about groups A and B. Here's what I want you to do. Here's a skill that will help you on this section. Scan quickly, and I'm talking about super quickly, and just tell me what paragraph do they talk about groups A and B? Just scan super quickly and tell me what paragraph do these terms. Yeah, look at that. So that was a quick answer from Courtney. That demonstrates a really good skill to have, which is we know that this question asks about groups A and B. Scan quickly through and bam, we find group A, group B. So we know that paragraph 3 is the relevant paragraph for this question. Now we are going to slow down and read in more detail to make sure we have the knowledge from the passage that we need to approach this question effectively. So we have an administration who split students into two groups. Group A consisted of disruptive students from the 9th and 10th grades. They were given an extra essay to write when they acted out. Let's engage with this information. Is having to do an extra essay related to an innate biological need? No, it is not. So we can definitely eliminate two answer choices for this question. What two answer choices are just gone? We know that group A, they were given an extra essay. It's not related to a biological need. Let's cross off two answer options. Yep, A and B are definitely incorrect. We cross them off. That's actually one of the cool features of two-part questions. We can get 2 for 1, crossing off bad answer choices. So now we need to look at group B from the passage. We know exactly where to go to get relevant information. Group B was composed of disruptive 11th and 12th graders. They lost the privilege of eating a snack during recess. Is that related to an innate biological need? Absolutely. So would we consider that primary or secondary? Primary. What's our answer choice? What choice do we go with? C, done. What I want to emphasize is that we did not need to use the information in some of these other paragraphs to answer question 3. This question asked specifically about groups A and B and how the researchers modulated behavior. So we went to the specific paragraph with the relevant information. We didn't let ourselves get distracted by some of this other information while we were doing question 3. And from there, we got the relevant information from the passage. We used our vocabulary, and that is how we got to a correct answer choice on the MCAT. That's the basic approach to passage-based questions. And then the way to really advance further is learn your vocab and do a lot of practice by, I know I've said the word practice probably 10 times so far. I say it because it's really true. You need to kind of expose yourself to the types of questions that the MCAT writers ask and get used to answering so you know what types of structure the question prompts entail, and you can be ready for it. Courtney asks a great question. Is it a better strategy to skim the questions first or the passage? Great question. And I'm going to let you know, I'm talking about the Psych Soc section specifically now. It is not a great idea to skim the questions first, and here's why. There are going to be certain concepts that show up in the questions that do not show up in the passage whatsoever. For example, question 2 talks about a letter that was sent home. It talks about producing longest lasting change on a reinforcement schedule. These concepts in question stems 2 and 4 are not mentioned in the passage in any way. So if you skim the questions first, and then you're kind of keeping an eye out for these concepts, you're keeping an eye out for something that won't actually be there once you go to read the passage. I actually want to distinguish that answer I just gave from the cars section. So I teach the cars section as well. I know that's not what the main topic is for today's presentation. But for those of you who aren't familiar, The critical analysis and reasoning skills section, that's a fancy word for reading. Basically, the writers give you a bunch of long passages that look kind of like this, but without any scientific data. And on the cars section, the passages will not be about science topics. In fact, the cars section, just think of it as a fancy version of reading from the ACT or SAT. All right, excellent. So we're essentially wrapping up and winding down here. And then I will answer any other questions from anyone kind of for the final few minutes. So on the cars section, they'll give you long, intentionally hard to understand passages on non-scientific topics. And every single question on the cars section will directly refer back to something that was in the passage. On the cars section, it's absolutely a good idea to go read the questions first, get a sense of what you'll be asked about, and keep an eye out for those topics as you read your cars passage. That's an example of how the different sections on the MCAT require slightly different approaches. So Courtney, you bring up a great question, a great thought. Do it on cars. Don't do that here on the Psych Soc section. And by it, I mean, before looking at the passage, go to the questions and read them to get a sense of what you'll be asked about. That's a great idea on cars, not worth your time on Psych Soc. So that kind of wraps up the content that I really wanted to get through with you. I have a little bit of extra stuff I could go over, but I want to actually take a moment to open the floor to anyone to ask me questions on the Psych Soc section specifically, or just kind of MCAT logistics overall. Go ahead and use the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and use the microphone, and I will answer some of your main concerns right now. Let me go ahead and let me return on my video now that we're not using the slides anymore. All right, I will open the floor. Questions from anyone? I don't see any from the chat box.
Looks like we don't have any questions right now. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up here. So thank you, Taylor, for this little mini lesson on Psych Soc and conditioning and all those fun vocabulary terms.
Yep, absolutely. And that's my email. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions on Princeton Review courses or programs, and I'll give you a reply. All right. Thank you very much, Doug.
Alrighty, so thank you all for coming by today. Just a reminder that our next session is on April 10th, and that'll be our MedPrep session number 7. And we will be discussing in that one secondaries and interviews and all that fun stuff that comes after you submit your application. So be sure to pop in for that one. And then after that, just to give you a preview of what's coming, our last 2 sessions are going to be a mock MMI in May, and then a mock MCAT come June. So we're going to be sort of changing our tune there once we get into May. So April will be our last normal session. Then we'll inform you at that point how things are going to be changing up. So if there's nothing else, I want to thank everybody for coming today and encourage you to come down next time. Otherwise, we will see you around. This video will be posted on our Facebook page. So you can, or not our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel. We transitioned to YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it there if you so choose. So thank you guys. Have a good rest of your weekends. Good luck with those finals coming up. And have a good spring break, because we won't see you guys until after spring break is done.